Alright, welcome everyone. In this video I set out to build the cabinet that you see sketched on the screen here. It's essentially a large cabinet, mostly made of plywood. It's got dados and rabbets, and then as well there's a face frame on the front with some inset doors and a solid wood top. And this cabinet will go underneath a TV that's mounted on the wall. It'll hold all the electronic equipment for the TV sources, and as well as some other personal stuff like picture frames and other doodads, whatever you have. You can see the overall dimensions on the top of the screen there. This was a fun build, so stay tuned and check out how it went. Out here in the shop, so far I've gotten all the lumber milled for the face frame. It's over here. Just got to rip that to width. I then turn my attention to cutting processing the plywood for the cabinet carcass. So here, just a little off camera, are the top and bottom sections, which you can see by my really nice sketch here. So the top and bottom sections, and then I've got all the 4 vertical walls sitting here on the bench. And so what I'm doing now is I'm turning my attention to the joints. So I have a couple dados to cut in the top and bottom, as well as some rabbets in the ends, and then I have a dado to cut on these two center shelves for the 2 center dividers for the fixed shelf. Excuse me. And so I've just gotten the dado stack set up. It did take me a number of tries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, it was 5, and then it was a little loose, so I took out a 4,000 shim. Tried again. That was too tight, so I added the 4,000 shim back in. Still too. I was going back and forth between 4,000s, whether I wanted to be a loose fit or too tight of a fit. And honestly, it's going to be a little tight. That's the best I could do. But maybe a little extra sanding of the panels and it'll fit nice. But it's a little snug, a little bit snugger than I want. But see, it's even hard to get off. But yeah, it's better than too loose. So that's the next step here. Is I'm cutting the dados in the top and bottom, as well as those center shelves, and then the rabbets in the top and bottom. Here we go. Alright, so I've gotten all the plywood pieces all sized for the carcass. I've also sanded them all to 120 grit just to get them ready for some primer on the inside. And so now what I'm doing here is I'm actually adding some biscuit slots to the carcass pieces. I have yet to really, I would say, define a really accurate and repeatable process for cabinet carcasses and face frames, and just kind of looking at some of the options on like the various media, either online or in books. And one of the methods that comes up often is using biscuits just to help align the face frame to the carcass. And just being one person in the shop, sometimes that can be a challenge with glue drying and trying to run around and get everything squared up. So on this project, I'm trying to use biscuits, and I'm going to be what I have here. Right, this is the fixed shelf that's in the very center of the cabinet. And what I do is I want the top of the face frame to be perfectly flush with the top of this shelf piece. So what I have is a couple of reference arrows saying, this is the top, this is the important surface. I'm putting that down on my bench. Going to clamp that down. And then I'll use my biscuit joiner, and I'll just reference my workbench, which is also the top surface of the shelf. And I'll make a couple of biscuit slots next to each other to allow just a little bit of lateral movement of that biscuit. Then when I go to make my face frame, the intention is that I will lay out all my face frame pieces, cut them to size, transfer the layout marks of the biscuits from the carcass to the face frame part, and repeat the same process. And then when I go to glue up the face frame on the carcass, I should be able to square everything up nicely between the two and get really nice alignment between the important surfaces. So that's what I'm up to here, cutting some biscuit slots, and then as well I'll be cutting some or drilling some pocket hole screws in the top piece of the carcass and the bottom piece of the carcass, where the fasteners will be invisible underneath and on top. And then on the sides, I won't do any pocket screws because those will be visible. And I'll just use clamps to glue that on that time. So here we go. Gonna cut some biscuits, drill some pocket holes, prime a carcass. Alright, so as the paint is drying on the cabinet components, I'm turning my attention to the top of the cabinet, which starts out as this, I think it's either 5/4 or 6/4 oak. And here I'm rough cutting it to length before I start the milling process. We're back out in the shop now, watching paint dry, literally. Some things I haven't recorded was the painting process. I think I got a little footage of adding primer, maybe a little bit of the paint on there too, but really it's been kind of 3 days of just painting, letting the paint dry, painting, letting the paint dry. My intention was only to do 2 coats of paint on the internals, and really I debated on painting this before assembling just at all. I was thinking that in this project I would fully assemble it, glue it up, clamp it up, do all the stuff, and then paint the internals. But I always have like nightmares of trying to get into really tight corners and edges with everything fully assembled and it looking like trash. So I pre-finished this as well, all the internal surfaces and some of the externals as well, so I don't have uneven moisture coming into the pieces. So there's 3 coats of paint on this. Like I said, I only intended to do 2, but after my second coat, the paint looked like complete garbage, so I had to sand it down and redo it. And the reason it looked like garbage, as I'm learning through my woodworking process here and doing a lot of painted cabinet projects, is that it seems like different colors of paint have a little bit different viscosity. So the darker the paint, they seem to be thicker, like they have to add more pigments to it, so therefore it gets thicker. As you brush or roll it on, it doesn't flatten out. And as well, it's very cool. It's cold outside. It's very cool in my shop and very dry. So I'm learning that I have to dilute the paint with water a little bit, especially the darker the color, more water. The cooler the temperature, more water, just to help it flow better. You think about thinning paints for spraying to get the viscosity down, to spray it nicely. I think there's also something to be said about thinning paints just for brushing and rolling, just to get it to flatten out. So got 3 coats of paint on the pieces. They turned out pretty good. I wouldn't say great. You can kind of maybe get a sense of it on the camera here if you can catch the light right. It looks pretty good. You can still see some light brush marks, some little nibs that dried on there. A little bit of, I don't know what that is, a little chunk of something that got dried on there. So these are good enough. They're not perfect, but they are good. Much better than the last coat. Much better than the way the last coat looked. So while these are setting up and drying, this paint takes I think about 18 hours before you can really handle it. So I had to wait 18 hours before I glue up the carcass. So in the meantime, I've been working on the top for this media cabinet, which is over here. It's a little over, it's probably about 1 3/16 thick right now, about 17 inches wide, and I think it's about 60 inches long. And so that came out of the clamps this morning, and now I'm going to run it through the drum sander to get it all flushed up. That's what I move on to next while the paint cures, and yeah, here we go. So all of the biscuits actually lined up on this thing when I went to set the face frame down on it, which is fantastic. And the face frame is nicely aligned with the cabinet. There's like maybe a fingernail's worth of face frame protruding on the bottom down here and on the sides, which is like right on. Probably even something that I can even perfectly clamp flush when I go to glue this on. So that's great. Other thing that was great is I've gotten these new clamps that go in dog holes. I was, I don't know, maybe skeptical a little bit of how well they work, but they're perfect for doing face frame work. So these are awesome. Can't remember the name of them. I think it was like Tay Tools or Taylor Tools. Amazon. Perfect. So now this went well. I'm going to move on to the side panels, which will also be the, I guess, the rear leg and kind of this front leg portion as well. And that's going to be constructed the same way. Just cut the length, glued and pocket screwed, and then that will be glued on to the side panel of the cabinet. So the face frame is glued, clamped into place. It's been clamped up for 2.5, 3 hours now. And so now I've just started taking the clamps off this, and I'm going to be clamping on the end panels onto the cabinet. They're going to go over like so. And these will just get glued, clamped, maybe a couple pin nails to kind of hold it in place while I'm getting the clamps on. There's a lot of glue area here. I got this whole, basically this whole surface on the side of the cabinet, and the side of this end panel will be glued up. And as well, this front edge will be glued to the back edge of the face frame. So really strong joints, a lot of glue. Shouldn't have any issues with from a structural standpoint. As this is setting up, the glue's setting up, I'm going to be working on the doors, which I have sitting over here. The rails and stiles have already been cut to size. Cut to the appropriate dimensions. They are a little oversized right now, so I like to leave them just a little bit oversized before the glue up, just in case these two joints, or I'm sorry, as these two edges come together, if they're not perfectly flush, I can take them to the table saw and true them up and get them sized appropriately. So right now, like the vertical style here is like basically almost like a line-to-line fit inside the opening, and then the width is, I gave myself a little bit more room on the width, since I don't usually have to trim too much of that off. So I'll be cutting the mortises for the joinery, and then as well cutting the grooves for the panel. So here we go. All right, so the side panels are now glued and attached to the cabinet, as well as all the nail holes have been filled and sanded down, and then the seam between the face frame and the side panels have also been filled and sanded down. While everything was kind of drying, I worked on the doors, and I have one mocked up here. You can see a door in the opening. Not to its final size yet, still just a little bit too big, but that's close enough. And so now I want to turn my attention, before I glue the door up, I want to turn my attention to the design, and I'll explain why here. So here's the design of the door. It's got these two X shapes with kind of a center thing bisecting them right here. And to get these laid out after the door is glued up is a challenge. You got to kind of guess and check, do a little bit of trigonometry, and just start from there. But what I intend to do, similar to my last project, is actually get the door frame pieces just clamped together in a without the center panel in it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bunch of center lines. So, or not a bunch, but I'm going to mark center on each of the vertical stiles there. And then I'm going to rip all of my material to the appropriate width and draw center lines on that. And then what I can do is I can line the center line of my 1/4 inch MDF with the corner and the center line on the door. If that makes sense. So if this corner is a center line and this other part right there is a center line, I know that's where my piece is going to be. I then can trace the outline of the door onto my little X pieces, and then I know roughly, well, pretty much what my angle is going to be and how long it's got to be to fit. And I'll do that for all the pieces, and those will be like my templates, if you will. And so from there, after I know my templates are correctly sized and they'll fit, I'll then go ahead and glue up the door, and then I'll start cutting out my pieces, and those will just get glued and tacked to the panel itself. The panel's 1/2 inch thick, so I've got some meat to attach a 1/4 inch pin to. So that's what's coming up next here. I'm going to rip all my 1/4 inch material down the appropriate width, which in this case is going to be 1 3/4 inches. And then I will start marking center lines on everything and start this whole layout process. So here we go. All right, so a number of some small things been getting done here, not really worth filming, but the top, as you saw, was cut to size, and then it's now been sanded up through 220 grit with the random orbital and then with hand sander. So that's all ready to go. The edge has been broken. It's ready for finish. Speaking of finish, right here I have a bunch of kind of sample colors for the client to choose from. She'll be here hopefully in about half an hour and be able to pick those out. So this is kind of underway. The top is nearing its completion, at least from a construction standpoint. It just needs to be finished. I'm going to pan over here to the cabinet. So what's going on here with the cabinet? The back of the cabinet has been cut to size, and it's been sanded, and then it's been primed with some dark gray primer. And now what I'm doing is I'm mocking it up for where the screw holes need to go to hold it to the back. And as well, I'm marking where the kind of the cable management pass-throughs have to go. So I've marked the surface on each of these individual compartments, and I've also marked the center line. So from here, I'm going to take that back off, clamp it to a bench around here somewhere, and then rough cut out that rectangle, and then use a pattern bit on the router and get them all consistent and the same. So. All right, so I was able to get the electrical cutouts in the back panel. I was also able to get that sanded, the primer sanded down, to get that ready for paint. I did screw up making the electrical cutouts. I grabbed my pattern router, set the depth of the bit so it wouldn't go too far through the actual material. Well, I wasn't paying attention to where the bearing was, and the bearing was actually up inside the router base, and so I kind of made a little oopsie there, and the first cutout ended up a little bit bigger than I wanted, but I've since squared that up and readjusted my router and used the actual template for the rest of them. So those all turned out good. I'm now turning my attention to adding an extra support leg to the center of the cabinet. I I don't think I need it, but I'll feel better if it's there, I guess, with the heavy top on there. So I have this little, it's like a little leveling foot thing with a threaded insert. And so what I need to do is figure out how I need to add some blocking to the bottom of this cabinet to get this at the right height. So it has the, the adjustment range to hit the floor when it's sitting down. So I'm gonna do that next, and then from there I got to make some door stops for the doors. I forgot about that when I hung them initially. So need to make some door stops, and then I've got some touch-up sanding to do on the top, and then really it's time for finish. So that's a wrap on this project. It turned out pretty amazing. I think it looks great. If you've enjoyed this content and feel others would like it as well, please hit that like button. It helps kind of let YouTube and the world know that this content is worthwhile watching. And if you don't want to miss any of my upcoming videos, please subscribe. Thanks for watching, especially if you made it to the end, and have a good one.